I'd learned to expect cruelty at family gatherings, but this Christmas was setting new records. 23 relatives crammed into Aunt Margaret's sprawling Connecticut estate, all united in their favorite holiday tradition, reminding me of my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. Emma's monthly allowance ends today, Margaret announced, standing at the head of the mahogany dining table like a queen addressing her subjects. 29 years old and still living off family charity. It's embarrassing. My cousin Victoria, Margaret's golden child, nodded enthusiastically. Finally. Maybe this will motivate her to get a real job instead of that little charity thing she does. I kept my eyes on my plate, cutting my prime rib into precise pieces. The little charity thing was actually a foundation I'd been quietly building for 5 years, but explaining would be pointless. They'd already decided who I was. The family trust wasn't meant to support lifelong failures, Uncle Richard added, swirling his wine. Your grandmother would be ashamed. That one stung, but I didn't let it show. Grandmother Eleanor had died 3 years ago, and I thought about her every single day. She'd understood me in ways this family never had. How much has she taken over the years? My cousin James asked, performing for the audience. Someone should calculate it. Margaret smiled, clearly having prepared this moment. $147,000 since she turned 18. Plus the apartment we're letting her stay in rent-free. The apartment I'd been living in for 6 years wasn't actually theirs, but this wasn't the time to mention it. That's more than most people make in 3 years of actual work, Victoria said. And what does Emma do? Volunteers at homeless shelters and reads to old people. Such a waste of the family name, Margaret's husband Harold muttered. The Ashfords are business leaders, philanthropists with real influence. Not, whatever this is. I took a sip of water, keeping my expression neutral. The irony was almost painful. The allowance ends immediately, Margaret continued. And Emma dear, will need you out of the apartment by February 1st. 2 months should be enough time to find something within your actual budget. My younger cousin Sophie, only 19, looked uncomfortable. Aunt Margaret, that seems harsh. It's Christmas. It's called tough love, Sophie, Margaret snapped. Maybe if someone had been tougher on Emma years ago, she wouldn't be in this situation. Still single, no real career, no ambition. Just drifting through life on family money. Uncle Richard raised his glass. To teaching responsibility even if it comes late. Everyone except Sophie clinked glasses. I continued eating, my heart rate steady, my hands calm. This was exactly what I'd expected. Actually, it was tamer than I'd anticipated. What will you do, Emma? Victoria asked with false concern. Do you have any savings at all? Any plan? I'll figure something out, I said quietly. That's what you always say, Margaret laughed. Grandmother spoiled you rotten, convinced you were special somehow. Look where that got you. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. You should move back to the Midwest, James suggested. Cost of living is cheaper. You could probably afford a studio apartment with a real job. Maybe waitressing. Or retail, Victoria added. Something with a steady paycheck. No more pretending to be a philanthropist when you can't even support yourself. The phone buzzed again. Then again. Popular tonight, Harold said sarcastically. Let me guess, one of your charity friends needs a ride? I excused myself to the bathroom, checking my phone in the hallway. 3 messages from Peter Whitmore, the estate administrator for Grandmother Eleanor's trust. The same trust Margaret thought she controlled. Peter. Emma, I need to speak with you about recent withdrawals. Margaret has exceeded her quarterly allowance by $340,000. Peter. She's hosting this Christmas party on the estate credit card. Wants approval for an additional $80,000. Peter. Please call when you have a moment. This is the 3rd month of overspending. I stared at the messages, then back toward the dining room where my family was probably still discussing my failures. The timing was almost too perfect. I texted back, I'll handle it. Give me 10 minutes. When I returned to the table, Margaret was in full form. We've been discussing your situation, Emma, and we all agree. It's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. I think that's fair, I said calmly. You'll thank us eventually, Uncle Richard added. Character is built through struggle, not handouts. The apartment will be available for rent at market rate if you're interested, Harold said. $4,000 a month. But I assume that's out of your range. Victoria pulled out her phone. I'm looking at studio apartments in your area. There's one for $1,200 a month. That's more realistic for someone at your level. Very helpful, I said. We're not being cruel, Margaret insisted, though her smile suggested otherwise. We're being realistic. You've had nearly 30 years to make something of yourself, Emma. Instead, you've coasted on family generosity and grandmother's misguided indulgence. My phone buzzed again. Peter's name flashed on the screen. Another charity emergency? James mocked. I stood up slowly, phone in hand. Excuse me. I need to take this. Of course she does, Margaret said to the table. Always running away when things get difficult. I walked to the library, closing the door behind me. Peter, hi. Emma, I'm so sorry to interrupt your Christmas, but Margaret's assistant just submitted another charge. She's trying to book a New Year's trip to St. Bart's for the entire family. $200,000. She claims it's a family tradition that should be covered by the trust. I'd been patient for 3 years. Patient while Margaret threw increasingly lavish parties. Patient while she redecorated her house 4 times using trust funds. Patient while she treated the estate as her personal bank account. Peter, I said calmly, what's Margaret's current quarterly allowance? $50,000 as specified in the trust documents you established after Mrs. Ashford's passing. And how much has she withdrawn this quarter? $390,000. She keeps insisting these are legitimate estate expenses. I looked at the library shelves filled with books grandmother and I had read together. She'd known exactly what she was doing when she'd spent those last months teaching me about trust management, estate planning, and family dynamics. Peter, I think it's time for a clarification meeting. Would you like me to come there? I can be there in 40 minutes. Actually, yes. That would be perfect. I'll bring the relevant documents. Emma, if I may say so, your grandmother would be very proud of how you've handled this situation. I returned to the dining room where the family had moved on to dessert. Margaret was holding court, telling the story of how she'd single-handedly saved the family business during the 2008 financial crisis. A story I knew to be completely fabricated. Emma. Victoria called out. We were just talking about you. James had the most brilliant idea. She could be Margaret's assistant, James said. Learn how real business works. Margaret could pay her $40,000 a year. That's generous, Margaret mused. But she'd have to prove herself first. Maybe a 6-month trial period. I appreciate the offer, I said, sitting back down. But I'll be fine. You say that, but you have no idea how expensive real life is, Harold said. No more family credit cards. No more trust fund safety net. The safety net was grandmother's idea, Uncle Richard added. And she's gone now. Time to face reality. Sophie tried again. Maybe we could extend the allowance for 6 months? Give Emma time too. Absolutely not, Margaret cut her off. Emma has had more than enough time. This family has carried her long enough. The doorbell rang. Harold frowned. Who could that be? Everyone's already here. Margaret's housekeeper appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Ashford, there's a Peter Whitmore here. He says he's the estate administrator and needs to speak with you urgently. The color drained from Margaret's face. The estate administrator? Why would he? I didn't call him. I did, I said quietly. Every head turned toward me. You. Margaret's voice was sharp. Why would you call the estate administrator? Peter appeared in the doorway, briefcase in hand, wearing a professional smile. Good evening, everyone. I apologize for interrupting your Christmas dinner. Mrs. Ashford, Miss Ashford, could I speak with you both privately? Anything you need to say can be said in front of the family, Margaret declared, though her confidence was wavering. Very well. Peter opened his briefcase, pulling out a folder. I'm here regarding the Eleanor Ashford Trust, specifically some concerning spending patterns over the past 18 months. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she set down her wine glass. I'm the trust administrator. I manage those funds appropriately. Actually, Peter said gently, that's not quite accurate. You're a beneficiary of the trust, Mrs. Ashford. But you're not the administrator. The room fell silent. What are you talking about? Harold demanded. Margaret has managed the family trust since Eleanor died. Peter pulled out a document, setting it on the table. This is the trust declaration executed by Eleanor Ashford 6 months before her death. She appointed a new trustee and established very specific terms for all beneficiaries. Grandmother left me in charge, Margaret insisted, but her voice had lost its authority. I'm the eldest. I've been managing everything. You've been managing your quarterly allowance, Peter corrected, which, according to the trust terms, is $50,000 every 3 months. However, you've withdrawn $390,000 this quarter alone. Victoria stood up. There must be some mistake. No mistake, Ms. Ashford. Your grandmother was very thorough in her planning. She established individual allowances for each family member, with strict oversight to prevent any single beneficiary from depleting the estate. Who's the trustee then? Uncle Richard demanded. Who did Eleanor put in charge? Peter looked at me. Emma Ashford. She's been the trust controller since 6 months after Mrs. Eleanor Ashford's passing. You could have heard a pin drop. That's impossible, Margaret whispered. She's the failure. She lives off our charity. Actually, ma'am, Emma hasn't taken a single distribution from the trust since assuming control. Not $1. The apartment you believe you're providing her? She purchased it outright 2 years ago with her own funds. Harold's face turned red. This is absurd. Emma doesn't have any money. She does charity work. She runs the Ashford Legacy Foundation, Peter corrected, which she established with her own inheritance from her parents' estate. It's now valued at $12 million and has donated over $4 million to various causes. Sophie's eyes went wide. Emma, is this true? I nodded slowly. Grandmother taught me everything. How to manage money, how to build something meaningful. She knew what would happen if someone like Margaret controlled everything. Someone like me? Margaret's voice cracked. I'm the successful one. I've built businesses, managed properties. With trust fund money, Peter interrupted gently. Mrs. Ashford, every business venture you've started in the past 15 years was funded by the family trust. Your home, your cars, your lifestyle, all trust distributions. So what? James challenged. That's what trust funds are for. Within reason, yes, Peter agreed. But Emma, as trustee, has full discretion over all distributions. And given the recent overspending, she's asked me to review all beneficiary allowances. Margaret's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Emma, please. There's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Aunt Margaret. You've been withdrawing 8 times your quarterly allowance. The street Bart's trip you wanted to charge to the trust? That alone would exceed your entire year's allocation. But the family trips are tradition, Margaret protested weakly. They're also not guaranteed by the trust terms, I said calmly. Grandmother gave me full authority to determine what's appropriate. Uncle Richard found his voice. Emma, be reasonable. We're family. I am being reasonable. I've been reasonable for 3 years while you all treated me like a burden. While you mocked my charity work and called me a failure. Victoria's face had gone pale. The apartment I'm living in, that's trust property, isn't it? Rent-free for the past 4 years, Peter confirmed. At Emma's discretion. And my business loan? James asked quietly. $200,000 approved by Emma 18 months ago. You were supposed to start repayment last quarter. Harold stood up abruptly. This is blackmail. You can't cut off the whole family because Margaret hurt your feelings. I'm not cutting anyone off, I said. I'm enforcing the trust terms that grandmother established. Everyone gets their quarterly allowance. $50,000 for Margaret and Harold. $35,000 for Richard. $25,000 for the cousins. That's not enough to maintain our lifestyle, Margaret protested. Then adjust your lifestyle. That's what you told me to do about 2 hours ago. Sophie spoke up quietly. Emma, I'm sorry. I should have said something earlier. They've been awful to you. You're 19, Sophie. You're not responsible for anyone else's behavior. Peter pulled out more documents. Mrs. Ashford, I also need to discuss the unauthorized charges from the past 6 months. The trust requires repayment of funds withdrawn beyond your allowance. Repayment. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. How much? $940,000. Harold collapsed back into his chair. We don't have that kind of money. Then we'll arrange a payment plan, Peter said professionally. Emma has authorized me to work something out. But moving forward, all charges must be pre-approved. This is revenge, Margaret said, tears forming. You're punishing us. I'm administering a trust according to my grandmother's wishes. She knew exactly what she was doing when she chose me. She knew I'd be fair even when you weren't. Uncle Richard's hands shook as he reached for his wine. What about the businesses? My commercial properties. Funded by the trust. Which means Emma has to approve any major expenditures or refinancing. Why restaurant expansion? Victoria asked weakly. Trust funded. Emma approved the loan. One by one they realized the truth. The success they'd lorded over me, the businesses they'd built, the lifestyle they'd maintained, all of it depended on my approval. Had depended on it for 3 years while they called me a failure. The trust is worth $40 million, I said quietly. Grandmother built that through careful investment and smart decisions. She didn't want it squandered on ego trips and luxury vacations. She wanted it to support the family, yes, but also to make a difference. You've been supporting us this whole time, James said slowly. Every business loan, every property purchase. Every bailout when your investments failed, I confirmed. But I never threw it in your faces. I never made you feel small. I just did what grandmother asked me to do, take care of the family. Margaret's makeup was running now, black streaks down her cheeks. Emma, please. I'm sorry about what I said. About all of it. I'm sure you are. But sorry doesn't change the fact that you tried to evict me from a home I own. That you cut off an allowance I never received. That you humiliated me in front of the entire family. We didn't know, Harold pleaded. You didn't ask. For 3 years, you assumed I was a failure because I wasn't flashy about money. Because I chose to work with charities instead of chasing status. Peter began packing up his documents. Emma, do you want to discuss the new distribution schedule now, or should I prepare formal documents? Formal documents, please. Everyone's quarterly allowance goes into effect January 1st. Peter, the Street Bart's trip is cancelled. Victoria let out a small sob. We already told everyone we were going. Then you'll have to tell them plans changed. Consider it a lesson in living within your means. Sophie stood up and walked over to me. I really am sorry, Emma. You didn't deserve any of that. Thank you, Sophie. For what it's worth, your quarterly allowance is being raised to $35,000. Grandmother wanted you to finish college without financial stress. Her eyes widened. But I said terrible things too. No, you didn't. You tried to defend me. That takes courage in this family. Peter shook my hand. I'll have the documents ready by Monday. Mrs. Ashford will be in touch about the repayment schedule. After he left, the dining room remained silent. Dessert sat forgotten on the table. The grand Christmas dinner Margaret had planned as a stage for my humiliation had become something else entirely. What happens now? Uncle Richard finally asked. Now you all go home and think about how you treat people, I said. Think about how you judge success. Think about whether having money is the same thing as having worth. You're not going to cut us off? Margaret asked hopefully. No. Despite everything, you're still family. Grandmother wouldn't want me to be cruel. But things change as of January 1st. All expenses get reviewed. All requests go through proper channels. And if anyone can't accept those terms. I didn't need to finish the sentence. The apartment you're evicting me from? I continued. I'm keeping it. But thank you for the offer to rent it to me at market rate. That was particularly thoughtful. Victoria had her face in her hands. We've been so stupid. You've been thoughtless. There's a difference. James stood up. Emma, the business loan. I have been making payments. I swear. I know, James. You're actually the only one who has been. I appreciate that. He nodded, looking relieved then ashamed. I gathered my coat and purse. I'm going home now. Thank you for dinner, Aunt Margaret. The prime rib was excellent. Emma, wait, Margaret called out. Stay, please. We should talk. We just did. Merry Christmas, everyone. I walked to the door where Sophie caught up with me. Can I call you? She asked quietly. Not about money. Just to talk. I'd like that. You're not what they said you were. I never was, Sophie. They just never bothered to look. I drove home through the quiet Connecticut streets, snow beginning to fall. My phone rang almost immediately. Victoria. Then James. Then Margaret. I let them all go to voicemail. Grandmother's voice echoed in my memory from one of our last conversations. Emma, the hardest thing about having power is knowing when to use it. Not for revenge but for balance. For reminding people that kindness matters more than ego. Even when they're cruel? I'd asked. Especially then. Because cruelty comes from insecurity. Show them what quiet strength looks like. Back at my apartment which I'd bought with money I'd earned through smart investments and careful planning, I made tea and sat by the window. My phone showed 15 missed calls now. The family was panicking, realizing their comfortable world had been built on the goodwill of the person they'd dismissed as a failure. I opened my laptop and looked at the foundation's balance sheet. In 5 years, we'd grown from 1 million to 12 million through careful investment and strategic planning. We'd funded scholarships, supported homeless shelters, established medical clinics in underserved communities. The little charity thing Victoria had mocked. A text came through from Peter. Your grandmother would be incredibly proud. Merry Christmas, Emma. I smiled. She'd known exactly what would happen when she made me trustee. Had known my family would continue their patterns of judgment and cruelty. Had known they'd eventually push me far enough. And she'd given me the tools to respond with strength rather than anger. Another text, this time from Margaret. Emma, please. Can we talk? I was wrong about everything. I'd respond eventually. Set up meetings with each of them. Establish the new normal. But tonight, I was going to enjoy the peace of knowing I'd handled it exactly as grandmother would have wanted. With dignity, clarity, and just enough consequence to teach a lesson. The snow fell harder outside, covering Connecticut in white. Inside, my tea was warm, my apartment was mine, and my conscience was clear. I hadn't sought revenge. I'd simply stopped protecting them from the reality they tried to force on me. Sometimes the quietest power is the strongest. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one holding everything together. And sometimes, the family failure is actually the only one who succeeded at what really matters. I raised my mug in a silent toast to Grandmother Eleanor, who taught me that worth isn't measured in volume or flash, but in what you build when no one's watching and how you treat people when you have every reason not to. Merry Christmas indeed.